on today's StoryBeat.
What is a successful writer? I always describe it as like when you're sitting there with your fingers on the keyboard, you're looking at the screen, you're in that world, the voices are in your head, it's playing out, and you got that stupid grin on your face, you're in the zone.
Yep.
I've already won.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Stephen L. Sears, began his career as an actor. He moved on to become a writer, story editor, producer, and creator in TV, film, digital media, and animation. He's worked on such TV series as Riptide, Hardcastle McCormick, The A-Team, Stingray, Walker, Texas Ranger, The Highwayman, Hollywood Detective, Grand Slam, Jesse Hawks, Superboy, S.H.E, Spies, and other popular favorites. He produced Swamp Thing for the USA Network, Raven for CBS, co-executive produced Xena, Warrior Princess, co-created and executive produced Sheena, and has had many pilot and development deals with various major studios. Steve's animation work includes Itsy Bitsy Spider, Transformers Rescue Bots, and the short film The Gift of the Hoopoe with legendary director Don Bluth. His prose work includes the non-user-friendly guide for aspiring TV writers, the graphic novel Stalag-X with Kevin J. Anderson, stories in such anthologies as Jeff Sturgeon's Last Cities of Earth and Alien vs. Predator's Ultimate Prey. Steve recently published the short story collection Tales of the Aboveground, Underground, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading. If you like offbeat stories with a wonderful twist to rival those of the Twilight Zone, I highly urge you to get Steve's book. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a truly great privilege for me to have Stephen L. Sears as my guest on StoryBeat today. Steve, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, especially for that intro, which I want to somehow get onto a t-shirt. That was kind of awesome. So
we can arrange that.
It's going to be a long t-shirt, which is like still befuddling to me that I've got all that.
I know. I have the same problem. You look back in your credits and you go, did I do all that?
I know.
But you did.
It is the weirdest thing. Yeah.
It is. So let's go back in time just a little bit. When did you first become interested in this thing called show business? When did you first think about it?
Wow. Okay. When did I first think about it seriously, or just aside from the, I want to be an astronaut one?
Well, it's you're probably a kid and you're watching TV or movies or something like that. And you're going, you know what? That looks kind of cool. I might want to try that. Was it that far back?
No, it goes back quite a ways. What it was for me was, it was a progression of myself. Now, I'm a military brat. So every 3 years you move to another state or another country and you had to reinvent yourself. So I was funny, I was kind of the comic person. I had different masks that I could wear to get to know people. But when I was I think I was 13 years old, we had retired at that point to a small town in Florida, St. Augustine, Florida.
Right.
And the state play of Florida was performed there every summer. It was called Cross and Sword. And it was performed at the amphitheater, and it was, summer theater. And so I don't know how I became aware of this, but one of the roles was for like a 10 to 13-year-old kid. So I went and I auditioned for it. I read the Gettysburg Address because that's the only thing I had memorized at the time. But I think more the fact that I could actually reach the back row of seats is why they hired me. And it was, it was a small role, just a few lines, and, I was throughout the play. I really loved it, though. I had a lot of fun doing it. So that kind of like got my interest in being in front of people and performing characters.
That whet your appetite.
It did. Yeah. I mean, it was like I had been doing it all my life because of, moving. Like I said, you reinvent yourself and you become kind of a character. And so I was kind of like, wow, this is great. So when I started high school, I got involved with the drama department. I got involved with music. I was in the band. I was the drum major at one point. I did almost every theater production. So naturally, when I graduated high school, I went to college to try to get a degree in medicine. That was the logical one. In medicine. Yes. It was pre-med. And that's because my father, when he retired, he became an administrator for a health organization, and they built hospitals. And I spent a lot of my time hanging around the hospitals, and I like science, and I like medicine. Now, you cannot become a doctor if you have a C in chemistry. So my chemistry 101 knocked me into liberal arts very quickly. And I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do. See, once again, you're hearing the long version of this. I'm actually shortening it up. Now, there was a movie that had come out at that time. This is in the late 70s. And it was called The Goodbye Girl. And that starred Richard Dreyfuss.
Indeed.
Now, people were coming up to me and they were saying, you should see this movie because he's playing you. Oh. Which I thought kind of weird. It's not like, oh, he's playing something you could play. He's playing you. So I saw it. And yeah, there were a lot of similarities. And I thought, well, that was interesting. Okay. So later on, he won an Academy Award. He won the Oscar for that role. And I was kind of bemused by the idea that somebody would win an Oscar by playing me. So I'm literally walking toward the student union at that time. That was at the University of Florida. And I was thinking on this, just kind of amused by it. And he won the Academy Award, but I thought to myself, well, yeah, but only special people win those things. And then literally I stopped. This was a Kodak moment in my mind. I stopped. And I thought, oh my God, if he had felt that way, he never would have gotten close to that award. And then I went, I'm going to be an actor. That's what I want to be. I love doing that. And so I called my dad and told him, your son's not going to be a doctor. He's going to be an actor.
But someday you're going to be a script doctor.
There you go. That's true. Good way of putting it. Thank you. Script surgeon. But my parents were incredible. They were great. My dad, his response to me was, you've always loved it, go and do it. And so I moved to Florida State University, which is unfortunately in the news right now. I moved to Florida State University and got their degree in theater. It was the top theater school. Then after that, I came out here to be an actor. By out here, Los Angeles.
Right.
That was my focus. That was my introduction to showbiz. And I realized that that was my home. That was just where I felt the best.
So did you land parts?
Oh, I did a few small things. I mean, like literally tiny things, a couple of commercials where I was just background noise. My first national appearance with a line was in 1981, I believe. And I moved out to Los Angeles in 1980. And it was on General Hospital on the soap opera. And the line was, it was just one line, 2 words, it hurts. That's all it was. Now, they got me my after card. Well, I already had my after card. They got me my SAG card. And it also taught me a lot about camera framing because when I was saying it hurts, I was holding my arm, which was in my lap. I was in a wheelchair. When I saw it later on, I realized you couldn't see what I was holding in my lap. So it looked like I was grabbing my groin and saying, it hurts. And Dr. Leslie, I guess, said, well, it's broken. We'll take you to x-ray. So that was amusing.
Nice to know your crotch was broken.
Exactly. I thought, wow, I got national exposure for that. But the thing was, is that during this time, this leads into where I am now. During this time, I'm fascinated with people. I'm fascinated with the business. And I'm one of these people that doesn't promote myself immediately. If I meet like somebody in the business, I don't immediately say, how are you going to hire me? I'm really curious about what they do. So I was meeting casting directors and I was curious about what they were looking for as far as what their jobs were. What's your day to day? And a lot of those walls started to drop. They got to know me as me. It doesn't mean they were hiring me, but they were comfortable with me.
Right.
And one of the things I learned from them is that they were tired of seeing people come in with the same material for auditions. It's like, Neil Simon was very big back then. So people would come in and they said, God, we can mouth the words along with them. We want to see original material. So I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll write my own stuff. So I started writing little 3-page scenes for auditions. And I was at a school at the time, an acting school called Dvorak Vaughn. Some of the people there obviously were at different schools. I found out some of my scenes were now being used at other schools where they were using them in scene study. And then I did a showcase one night where there were 7 scenes being presented. I only knew the scene I was doing with my partner. I didn't know who else was doing whatever.
And you had written it.
I'd written that one. When I showed up and saw what else was being done, 5 of the 7 scenes were written by me.
Oh.
So there was a casting director there who asked me if I was the one who'd written all those, and I said yes. And she said, well, you should think about being a writer. And I said, no, that's a lot of type. I'm not a writer. I'm not a writer.
Says the eventual professional writer.
And I actually still say it today. So what happened was that night I pulled out a script from a TV show and I looked through it, and very naively I thought, well, it's a bunch of 3-page scenes, except there's an arc and there's a structure and there's threads and there's characters. And so I thought I would write a script for the fun of it. And it was horrible. I will admit it was horrible, but man, it was so much fun. Because I was every character. I was the director. Everything. I played the movie in my head as I wrote this. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm also working at a restaurant. Actor, figure it out.
Yes,
I was a waiter. Of course, it's an entry-level position.
You can ask any waiter in Los Angeles, how's your second act coming?
Exactly. Or go to a Starbucks and count the number of laptops. You'll know the exact percentage of writers in the room.
Exactly.
So anyway, I met a friend there, a guy named Bert Pearl, and he and I became best friends. And Bert and I decided we were going to start analyzing scripts for the fun of it. That's it. I also thought, as an actor, it would make me a better actor if I understood what the process was.
Of course.
So we started doing this. As a part of this, I also started calling production houses and asking them if they had writer's guides. Some shows had writer's guides, some didn't. And I was also told, don't ever call a production company. They'll just hang up on you. I, of course, being a bit naive and stupid, was like, well, what harm can that do me? I'll call anyway. So I called over to Stephen J. Cannell Productions because they were producing a new series called Riptide. And I got this woman on the phone and asked her if they had a writer's guide. She said, we don't, because she said, did you see the show? And I said, oh, I saw the pilot. I love it. And she goes, oh, great. And then we started talking about Florida. We just started talking about casual stuff. As again, I'm curious about people. So she had relatives in Florida. I was from there. We talked and talked and talked. But she said, have you and your friend written any scripts? And I said, yeah, we've written maybe 4, just for the fun of it.
These are Spec TV scripts.
Spec TV scripts, right. One was a Simon & Simon. One was a Magnum PI. So she said, well, the producers always look for new writers. So if you have an agent, send them over. Now, we got off the phone. I didn't get her name. She didn't get my name. But I had met this agent, and I told him this story. And he said, oh, sure, I'll send a couple of your scripts over. In about a month, we got a call from Tom Blomquist, who was the producer of Riptide. And he said, why don't you come on in, meet me and the exec producer. So we went in and we met with him, and the exec producer was Babs Grayhowski. And we just had this great time, just chatting and talking about things. And eventually they asked, do you have any ideas for Riptide? And Bert and I planned to write one for the heck of it. So we had like 5 ideas. In any event, over the course of 2 meetings, they selected one of the ideas and they asked us to write a story.
Wow.
So when we wrote up the story, we went back to meet them. We watched them rip it apart and put it back together again. And it was the most wonderful thing we could have experienced, because these people, they were professionals. They allowed us to be a part of the process. It wasn't like we were excluded. We were in there jumping in and talking about different things. At the end of that meeting, Tom turned to me and he said, I need the name of your agent for business affairs. Believe it or not, up until that moment, I had no idea what was going on. I literally looked at him in shock and I said, did we get an assignment? And he goes, yeah, you got the assignment 2 weeks ago. Now, Bert and I had no idea. We didn't even know whether or not you got paid for this. We didn't. And we were trying to figure out how much we'd be paid. And we guessed it would be like $500 because we had to split it. But it was $15,000 for an episode of television at that time. So he and I wrote the first draft, turned it in, and we got a call from, it's on my, I actually still have the tape. It's an old tape recording message machine. Tom called on a Monday, and he said he had read the script, he really liked it, and he'd given our names over to the A-team and Hardcastle McCormick in case they were looking for writers. And I was like, what is going on here? And then on a Wednesday, I was sleeping on the floor with my then girlfriend because I could not afford a mattress. At that time, I'd left the restaurant. I was making $130 a month putting ads in the front of shopping carts. And the story money we got, I put that directly into savings immediately. So she called that morning and I answered the phone and I was asleep. And so I'm like, hello. And she says, hi, Steve, this is Babs. And I go, oh, hey, Babs. And she goes, I gave your script to Stephen J. Cannell, the guy who owned the company and created all these shows.
Oh, yeah.
And she said he only had one note for the entire first draft.
Wow.
So she said, we were wondering whether you guys just want to come over here, get an office, and work with us full time.
Wow.
And my response to it was, oh, okay. And she said, literally, she remembers this to this day. She said, you're asleep, aren't you? And I went, I just woke up. And she goes, when you realize what I just said, call me back. And she hung up. She's wicked.
So in all your years in Hollywood, how many people have you heard has that ever happened to?
Nobody.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And everybody has a different entree into this. What Bird and I went through was exactly the steps that are textbook. You write the material, you get the meeting, you sell the idea, you write the first draft, you're on staff, except they rarely come in that order.
Oh, rarely. And rarely that quickly.
Well, I was going to say, the time between I wrote that first horrible, horrible script to the time that I was standing in an office trying to figure out what the heck to do with this office was about 1 year. It only took, and that is seriously, I mean, this sounds like it's bragging. It's not, because I'm still mystified by it. That's the closest to an overnight success that I've ever heard, because I had no intention of being a writer.
That's pretty close. It only took me 13 years.
Neophyte. You're a child.
Nothing to it. Nothing to it.
But mine was accidental. That's the thing. And it was so weird.
Well, clearly you demonstrated something that they really liked, and that then held you in good stead. So you didn't get any training, really. You trained yourself, yeah?
No, I've said this at lectures because I find this to be amusing. The only book I've ever read on writing for television is the one that I wrote. And the only classes I've ever taken in it are ones that I now lecture. It's true. Everything was geared toward acting, but I didn't realize that at the core, I was not a writer. I was not an actor. What I was a storyteller. All creatives are storytellers. That's what I was. From when I was a kid trying to blend in with the new school, I was a storyteller. When I got up there to play that role, I was a storyteller. Everybody working in a creative effort, everybody on the set and in the office, they are storytellers. The guys pulling the cable on the set, they're actually storytellers because they're trying to make this grand story work. And I realized that's what I was. Finding the correct venue for it, that was the magic.
Well, I think the listeners should pay close attention to what has happened here. It's rare. Don't think because Steve had this relatively easy entree in that everyone does. Most people do not. But the most important lesson here is that if you're really studying the work that you want to do and you are even vaguely talented at it, you need to work at it. And maybe you will get fortunate enough to meet someone like you did.
Well, and it's true. And I use my story as I just posted something about this a little while back where somebody had asked a question about screenwriting and I did this long screed about it. But at the end of it, I told people how I broke in a much shorter paragraph than I just did right then. But I mentioned I started from nothing. I had no training as a writer. I never intended to be a writer. It took me 2 years of the imposter phenomena before I decided that I was a writer, or at least they're paying me for it.
Did you think you were a good writer at that point or just a writer?
I can't judge that. I'm a writer who loves to write. And it is like asking the question of what is a successful writer? I always describe it as like when you're sitting there with your fingers on the keyboard, you're looking at the screen, you're in that world, the voices are in your head, it's playing out, and you got that stupid grin on your face, you're in the zone.
Yep.
I've already won. But then if you look over your shoulder and you notice all these other people are watching what you're doing, that is the next step. And I don't know how to define that.
I assume it's the same thing for eventually becoming a producer. Well, of course, the credits are a whole issue in itself, eventually an executive producer, but you didn't go to school for that either. You learned that on the job.
I learned it on the job. And I will tell you that I was so incredibly fortunate that I started out, both Bert and I started out at Stephen J. Cannell Productions.
No kidding.
Steve was a writer, a wonderful human being, a great guy. He was known for starting people's careers. And I remember the first week that Bert and I checked into our office and literally we couldn't figure out what we were supposed to do with our assistant. We're like, did we make her coffee? What are we supposed to do? But Tom Blomquist, the producer I mentioned, he came into to the office. We were chatting and I told him, I said, we don't know what we're doing. And he said, well, welcome to grad school, except we're going to pay you to learn. And that was Steve's philosophy. You had to be involved. You weren't a writer who stayed in your office. The first week, we were in the editing bay. We were watching the screenings. We were in the casting sessions. His logic was eventually he wanted you to become a successful producer. That would benefit him. But also there was a little kid inside of Steve who was he was like giddy with excitement when he saw people who had passion.
And there are others like him, but that's kind of rare, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, unfortunately. That's why I was so lucky.
So I'm curious, do you think that your starting out as an actor impacted your ability to write?
Oh, absolutely. I was a storyteller. I just didn't know that I could actually use my fingers to type it out on a keyboard and control all of the elements. So I've had this conversation with a few people who ended up in other aspects of the industry. They may have come out here as an actor, but they ended up in a technical side or whatever. But we've talked about our commonalities. And what we learned in theater or in our storytelling time definitely came in to play as we explored our other areas. I'll give you a great example, which I anticipate you're going to nod your head wildly on this one, is one thing that actors are required to take as a part of their training is improvisation. Mm-hmm. So improvisation is you get up there with maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 people, they give you a scenario, and then they say, go. And immediately, without a discussion, you have to create a character. All of you have to somehow create a conflict, and you have to create a resolution within this and have all of your characters unique and participatory in this particular scene. Improvisation, okay? Welcome to one day of television.
Yeah.
That happens every freaking day. When I go in and pitch a story, and it's one thing I miss about the pre-Zoom and the pre-COVID generation. I used to love going into office meetings. You go into an office, and what do? Well, you've got to pitch something. Yeah, but you're going to just lecture them? You're going to perform it. You're going to improv it because you got to read the room. You got to know when they're leaning back and how to pull them back forward. Soon as I walk into a room, I start reading the room. I look around and I say, this is somebody's office. It's their place away from home, which means they brought things from their home to make it more familiar. Where are those tchotchkes? What can I learn about this person? And then the theater training I had taught me how to feel the emotional mood of your audience. And that's a hard one for people who have not done theater to understand.
It is.
You literally can be out on stage and you can feel it. It's an energy. And you play it. So all that was from acting, but I'm telling a story.
But part of that, correct me if I'm wrong, is you have to be comfortable with what you're going to present in the first place. You can't be all up in your head worried about what you're going to say in order to relax in and figure out how to read the room. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely true. There's a whole psychology of it, and the biggest impediment to it is yourself. And this overall, just in creativity in general. You feel like I'm in their environment. I'm the fish out of water. I'm out of place. I don't know exactly what am I going to say? Am I going to offend them? No, you just embrace it. You reach back into yourself and you say, here's the passion. Mm-hmm. Go with that.
So I'm curious, I know that you have a phenomenal sense of humor and that you are very witty and charming and can be very funny, but you wound up writing hour-long dramas, mostly. That's what you're known for. How did you get 2-hour-long dramas instead of winding up in the sitcom world?
I have a lot of people who have asked me that. When they find out I'm a writer, they assume that I'm writing sitcoms or something.
Because you're funny.
Okay. I don't know. I rarely listen to myself anyway. But I think part of that is a lot of the stuff that I have written has been adventure, detective adventure.
Absolutely.
But you're correct. I've run the gamut. I have written drama. I have written comedic things. I have written animation. I've written adventure. I've written sci-fi, fantasy. I have run the gamut. I'm very, very fortunate that I'm able to cross over genres, but there is a reason for that. It's not as just like, I want to snap my fingers. But every time I write real people in my mind. And characters, if you believe in the characters and the audience believes in your characters, the background doesn't matter as much. They're following those characters. So one of my observations about life is that life has got a lot of built-in comedy to it, if we took the time to look. And I don't mean knock-knock jokes. I don't mean laugh-out comedy. Mostly it's that ironic observation of our own lives. So what is that? What is an ironic observation of your life? It's actually a shift in perspective. You're taking for granted what's happening to you. You fall into the same tropes of, oh, woe, and pity me. But then one day you start to chuckle because you realize, well, if I look at it this way, that's what creativity is. That's storytelling. If I just wrote a slice of life that was the mundane slice of life, that's not interesting. It's always that shift in perspective. And if I can make my audience adopt that shift in perspective, then they're going to do the same thing I did. They might chuckle, or they might go, oh my gosh, I didn't think about that. Or, but as far as the comedy thing, I think where that comes from with me, why I'm like that, as one of my friends said, I tend to look at the world as if I'm walking backwards. So when you're looking forward, everything in front of you is exactly what you expect, and you walk forward. The moment you turn around and look where you just came from, you go, oh, I didn't see that. Oh, that was there. Oh, that was interesting. You've shifted perspective. So I'm very good at shifting perspective, which, by the way, makes me intolerable when I have a debate with somebody because I can become devil's advocate real easy.
Well, I think that that's a really interesting way to put it. I've never heard anybody say it quite that way. And I thank you for saying it, because it's a really interesting way to think about looking at the world as you've passed by it. That, by the way, is similar to a lesson that Howard Suber, the great professor at UCLA, used to teach, which is that if you're going to understand how a story works, it's like going down a whitewater rapids river. You're going to go down it the first time, and it's all going to zoom by you very fast, and you might pick up the general gist of things, but you're not going to pick up any details. You need to watch the movie or go down that river a second and third and fourth time to actually start to see how it works and what the details are.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is something similar in that you're looking at it in hindsight.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much truth to that, because so much of what we experience is, I'm going to use the word, experiential, because it is. We're experiencing it, but we're not analyzing it. We're not trying to dissect it. And to be honest, we don't want to go too far with that. But what we want to do is say, wait a minute, how did that affect me, and why did it affect me, and why is it I want to go back and relive that, knowing full well I can never have the exact same experience because the first experience was so unique.
Absolutely.
But as a storyteller, can I pass that on to someone else?
Well, the audience doesn't need to care about any of that. It's really the creators that need to care about that.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, God, you know full well how much we have to go through just to put 1 second on the
Absolutely. And frankly, I think the right attitude toward it is that the audience should never have to care about it, ever. They should just be entertained and take something away from it one way or another.
Yeah. And for those, I did a talk just recently about this in character development. And this will illustrate it for anybody out there who isn't quite clear on what this is, what we're referring to. As I said, I am known for writing characters. I'm known, actors so far seem to love the characters that I write. So I'm very good at that. Now, I use this example when I talk to new students and they're developing characters. I say, if you pick your best friend, the person you know the most, you've known them since you were a child, you know everything about them. I can guarantee you only know 20% of who they are.
If that.
However, for that 20% to make sense, you have to know there was an 80% that existed. So when I create my characters, I have to know that 80%, not necessarily in detail, but I have to know that 80%. But that 80% will never end up on the screen, except it will affect every bit of what you see. That's what we have to go through as creators. Is
that what you go through to develop your characters? Do you actually sit down and write out character bios and that kind of thing?
It's a good question. Since nobody taught me that I was supposed to do that, the way I do that is it's trial and error. I play with my characters. I write so much about my characters in scenes before they even hit the actual page. So I tell people if I'm writing a pilot, I'll write 30 to 40 pages of that pilot, then I trash it all and start over again because I'm meeting these characters for the first time.
So you're learning about the characters by going through a draft.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as I go through it, I learn little things more about them. I include that. And it's just like a brand new friendship.
Do you literally throw the whole thing out, or do you just use bits and pieces?
Well, yeah. Let me clarify that. When I say throw things out, there is no set rule for these things, people. It's when I say I throw things out, no, what happens is that I realize I have to start from square one. If some of what I already developed works from that point on, absolutely. I always refer to it as I put it in the filing cabinet. so I can pull it if I need it. But I don't adhere to it. I don't say, oh my gosh, I already wrote this, so I already have it. That's a lazy writer.
You're obviously well known for having worked on Xena with a former wonderful guest on the show, R.J. Stewart, who produced that show.
R.J.
And you also are known for co-creating Sheena. Those are two powerful, strong female characters. Clearly, you are not female. And so how does a writer get into the mindset of writing a powerful character of a different gender that has to be the protagonist of the show?
One of the things I was known for early on was, and again, I didn't recognize this because I didn't know the terminologies. I refer to it this day as I was known for writing outside of my skin. So writing outside of my look, my culture, my race, my gender, my orientation. Now, it wasn't like I was trying to do that, but I was able to do it. What I tell people, and this is the truth, is that when I start to write a character which is outside of my skin, the first thing I do is I remind myself I am not that character. I have not lived that life. I have not seen the world through those eyes. Now, what that tells me is I have to work 5, 6, 7 times harder to try to get this right. As I've also mentioned, I'm a research hound, so I just definitely go into research. But the most important thing about this, which has helped me, as I said earlier on, I'm fascinated with people. I just love listening to people talk about their experiences and their lives. And I listen. I want to hear these things. I've always been attracted to underdog stories. And in our culture, especially historical underdog stories, that deals a lot with disenfranchised people. Groups that have been pushed out of it, groups that were ignored. I'm fascinated by them and the experiences they've had, the successes and the achievements despite the opposition. So I'm attracted to those particular characters. But at the same time, the biggest thing that I do is I remind myself, you got to work really hard at this. And you have to make sure you accept the outside voices of people who have lived those experiences.
Do you think your writing helps you understand or make sense of our world, which then helps the audience make sense of the world you're creating?
It's funny because for me, writing and creating is basically putting a bunch of question marks in front of me and saying, I've got to dive into these question marks. It's always kind of a back and forth reciprocal thing. But with everything I write, every character I create, the magic words, as you know this, is the phrase, what if? So the what if actually goes right to the core of characters, for example. What if this? There's the question mark for me. If I'm going to approach this character, am I approaching it from a stereotypical viewpoint? And if I do that, what if I avoid that? What if this? But you phrase it a little more succinctly than I have, because I've had a hard time actually talking about that. For me, it is a back and forth. One reason, I know I've been doing this for 40 years, and I still feel like I'm a kid in a sandbox just having the time of his life.
I gotcha.
Yeah, and it's because of that. There's all these question marks, and they have to be answered. I have to plow through them.
That may have come out of your acting training, whatever training you had, whatever you did, because in acting, there's a famous phrase called the magic what if.
Yeah.
And that obviously is related because you're writing for actors.
Yeah. And the what if, by the way, is the shift in perspective. Going back to that again. What if? So
let's carry on with what if, but talk about the book that you've just published, Tales from Aboveground, Underground. Tell the listeners what the book is about. I know you've got, I don't know, I didn't count the number, but there's 7 or 8 stories in the book, short stories. Yeah. They're all wonderful to read. They're all full of life and energy. What do you look at the book and think that this is what it's about?
Well, the best way I can illustrate that, it is a book of short stories. They do have, the majority of them have like twists or shifts of perspective, as I like to put them there. It's, you're not expecting it, or maybe you are, but then I dance to the left or the right. Mm-hmm. When I finished this book, and this was a group of short stories that I just been putting together as I've been working on other novels. And I do have like 3 novels I'm working on. However, that is also like the waiter in your favorite restaurant saying, oh, yes, I'm up for the next Spielberg movie. Okay, I guess I'm working on these things.
Until they're published and out in the world, they're not real.
There you go. So with these short stories, every now and then, just a notion will pop into my head with the magic what if, and I will just start writing it out. So this was kind of a collection of those, and I wanted to go ahead and publish them because why not? I had them, and it was weird because mostly I'm writing a collection of my stories, whereas unless you're an established author, that seems like kind of vain. Like, I'm sorry, you are not an established author. Until then, you contribute to anthologies, which is, I had also been doing that. But to illustrate the question you asked, I struggled to come up with a title and cover art because my stories are really disjointed.
They are a little disjointed.
There's not one theme that you can look at for the entire thing.
But you do have a whiff of death in almost all of them.
Really? God, I didn't even notice that.
Yes, there's zombies.
I like that. But I mean, there's romance, there's comedy, there's zombies, there's sci-fi, there's time stories.
In the book, you finally get to your unproduced screenplay of Harry O'Fell.
Mm-hmm.
And what does he do? He chases after demons from hell.
Yeah, Harry O'Fell, the detective from hell. And that was the pilot off of a screenplay that I'd written.
Is that not a whiff of death?
Of course. God, what have we learned about Steve today? He's a killer. So yeah, I had to agonize over what, at one point I was trying to come up with a cover that had like a gallery of different ideas and everything. And eventually it was a combination. The title, The Aboveground Underground, was actually a title that I had for a school newspaper back in 7th grade, literally a one-sheet mimeograph. And I called it The Aboveground Underground. I just thought it was cool. So I thought, what the heck? It's a callback to my childhood. I put that on there. But yeah, I don't know how I could describe it. It is an eclectic group of stories. As long as they still work for people, that's really what counts.
It's a true anthology. It's not about one thing or another.
Yeah.
And did you write them all at one time, or did the stories you wrote over a long period of time?
I had been collecting them as stories, probably for like 4 years, something like that, because I was working on other projects. So this was kind of like a little respite. And then it was just one day I looked at the stories I had, and my wife, who's an author, Jessica Bronner, she said, you could put together a collection. And of course, I dismissed that immediately. But she kept saying, no, you could do this. And I went, well, no publisher is going to accept this. And she goes, well, you do know about self-publishing. And I went, yeah. And she goes, well, why not? You're not looking to make millions of dollars off of this. I thought, why not? For the experience, I would.
And by the way, as a self-published author, your book can last forever without being winding up on the remainder table at the bookstore.
That is a true thing. Yes, you do have a little bit more of that particular control, which I appreciate quite a bit.
You most certainly do. So it took you about 4 years. Were these just stories that just came to you? Were they bolts out of the blue? Or did you sit down and think, I'm going to write a short story today?
Okay, this goes back to the core of where do you get your ideas? I'm sure you've never been asked that before.
Oh, I have been asked that before.
Yeah. And so my reaction to it is this. When people ask me, where do you get your stories? I literally am a bit amazed at that because I go, I can't stop them. I can't shut it off. Literally, I can't. I am one of those people.
I understand.
I'm not going to say I'm clinically ADHD, but boy, I've had a lot of people make that observation, including people who are authorities in that realm. But I can't shut it off. So everything is a story. This right now is a potential element of a story. It goes into that filing cabinet. It used to be that if I was, like when I was writing scripts and everything, if I was with somebody, my first wife, for example, a wonderful person, but she always kept a notepad in her purse because we could be watching a movie in a theater and I would stop and I would say, give me. And I just write down something and hand it back to her. These days, I do it by texting myself. And I have this long list of text ideas for stories. So when I have the time and I'm just kind of playing with one of them, I just start to write little aspects of it. And then again, you're swallowed by the zone and suddenly you are writing out this story. One of them is based on actually meeting my wife. That was the one called Coming Out. And, it mentions their meeting at a convention. There was another one in there, which was the love story, The Bumblebee.
Mm-hmm.
And I had written that one originally. Actually, my wife used to publish anthologies. She did a thing called Story of the Month Club. And every month they would feature a story. And then at the end of the year, they would publish all the stories. And she asked me to submit one for the February, which was Valentine's Day. So I came up with this concept of what I thought would be an ultimate love story for a particular person. I don't want to give away too much, but that was just strictly a love story. The elements in it were like, okay, but what I was focusing in was on this love story. And the twists or anything else that comes out of it was actually me trying to secure the love story in the process. How can I justify this? So,
do the twists also just come to you as well, or do you actually work at trying to figure out the twists?
Sometimes they come to me early. Other times I'm in the sandbox playing. And then it's that phrase, what if you did this? Wow. Why would anybody do that? And that's reason enough.
So when you start to work on a story or a script or whatever you're working on, or a book, a novel, what do you tend to think of first? Plot, character, action? What do you think of first typically?
I sound like I'm all over the place. There are different...
No, Steve, you sound like a writer.
Yeah. Well played, my friend. Sometimes it will just be a character that I want to play with, and I say, what's the most interesting situation I can put that character? Sometimes it will just be a visual. It's kind of like the best artwork I've seen is the one that kind of makes you lean back and go, what am I looking at? And I think about that, and I think, how can I get to that?
But is that a picture in your mind's eye of some activity or action?
Sometimes.
Or is it a character?
But sometimes it is an image of action. Other times it's a character that I have enabled inside of myself. Yes, people, I do walk around the house in different characters. It's part of my writing process.
I don't know anybody that doesn't.
Who would do that? I don't know. But use the Harry O'Fell thing as an example. Harry O'Fell was based on a screenplay that I wrote. And it was after like 2 years of working on TV shows, we had a strike, and I finally had a chance to write a screenplay. So I thought I would do this. And that entire screenplay came from a conversation I was having with my writing partner back then, Bert Pearl. I can't remember the conversation, but whatever it was, he turned to me and he said, yeah, like when hell freezes over. And I said, when hell freezes over, everybody will owe everybody something. And then that part of me went, wait a minute, that's true. And what if hell froze over? And that percolated the entire screenplay. With that screenplay, I was meeting with one of the executives at CBS, and they told us that they did long-form pilots, 2-hour pilots as opposed to one. And they said, do you have an example of your long-form work? And I only had that screenplay. And so I left it behind. Later on that week, the executive at Columbia called me, and he said, so I'm curious about that Harry O'Fell screenplay. Does anybody own that? And I said, well, I do. He goes, so you haven't sold it? And I went, no. And he goes, oh. And I went, okay, there's something going on. You want to fill me in? And the executive's named Jeff Klein. He's an absolutely incredible person. We became friends. He said, look, I got to be honest with you. CBS wants to turn that into a series.
Wow.
But we don't own the rights. And he goes, honestly, you can go to any studio in town. You already have a deal. We're just hoping you'll stay with us. And
Wow.
I told him, I said, because you were honest with me, absolutely. And so that ended up being the pilot script that I wrote for them. They paid for it. It was written out. Jeff Sagansky was the president of CBS Studios, and apparently it came down between my pilot and another show. And they decided to go with the other show, which was fine. So the rights returned to me, revision of rights. The original screenplay, I think that might have been sold or like 2 or 3 times since then. So but that was just for the fun of it.
So you, and this happens to any number of writers, you have capitalized on a single story multiple times.
Sure. Yeah. And in this particular case, like I said, Harry O'Fell, which is the same character in the screenplay, just a different type of circumstance, was in the pilot. And then the pilot episode ended up in the collection of tales. And one of the novels that I'm writing right now is actually the screenplay version of Harry O'Fell. So I'm following that story.
The feature-length version.
The feature-length version. There are slight differences in there.
Because what you published in Tales from the Aboveground Underground is the pilot.
Right.
Obviously, in the book, it's in screenplay form,
right.
But it's not full-length pages in your book. So that's what I'm going to guess, 60, 65 pages?
Yeah, about 60 to 65 pages. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For an hour.
And it's only in the print version of the book. If somebody orders it on Kindle, and the reason for that is you turn a deficit into a positive. Exclusive only in the print version, you can get Harry O'Fell the pilot, when in fact it's like, and the formatting for Kindle sucks. So we're not going to bother with that.
It just gums it all up, doesn't it?
Yeah. So
what lessons would you say that you learned? What big lessons have you learned from people like Stephen Cannell? I mean, you've already told us a little bit, but I'm talking about production lessons from Stephen Cannell or R.J. Stewart or any of the folks that you've worked with.
The first thing, there are so many people involved with production, and every one of them deserves your absolute respect. As I said, I refer to everybody as storytellers. Everybody on that set is a storyteller. Everybody in the office is a storyteller. I'm a storyteller. They are worthy of the same respect that I demand. The second thing, and I'm really inspired by upcoming independent filmmakers because of this, is I didn't realize the importance back then of learning everything that you don't do. As I said, Steve Cannell had us in the editing room, had us in casting. He wanted us to learn everything. Didn't mean we had to be experts at it, but we understood it. And the more you understand about the entire process, if you are a writer, take an improv class. If you are an actor, take a class in editing, take a class in directing, write something. Everybody should write something. The more you learn about how the process is put together, the more valuable you are to a production company. I'm not going to fire somebody that I don't, if I have to explain all the process every time, that person is not as useful to me. But if I say this, and that, and they get it immediately, they say, we'll take care of it, no problem. It means this: I get to go home on the weekends. You have made my life easier. Bless you. I will allow you to work on every show that I work on, and eventually, hopefully, you'll hire me. So, yeah, learn everything you can about all the other processes. And independent filmmakers these days, they're having to do that. It's like the old person's going to speak right now. I don't think you understand how lucky you are by that. It seems like a task, but boy, when I was a kid, I wish we had that. I mean, my first films were like Super 8 cameras when I was 10 years old. So,
of course. So let's talk for half a moment about pitching. You've already said that you loved going into the room to pitch. Explain what the secret for you is of pitching. Is it being very well memorized or being loosely memorized? What secrets can you share about pitching?
Okay, I can give you some mechanical things, and I can talk overall about it without going on too long. First and foremost, you're going to know your material if you have the passion for it. You're going to go in there. You have to read the room. You have to know how to shift gears really quickly. Also, keep in mind that sometimes somebody in the room might say, well, what about this? And it's not something you want to do, but if you say, that's interesting, you'll get to the next step. And once you're in production, you can try to change it back if you want to. I tell people that when you are pitching and people are trying to offer input in the room, your reactions should always be of the following. Oh, that's interesting. Wow, I didn't think about that. That's a great idea. I got to give that more thought. Wow, that opens up possibilities. Everything is a forward movement of positivity. Now, what you've done by that is you've shown these people that not only are you enthusiastically embracing their input, you are project-oriented. You're not person-oriented. You're not ego-oriented. You're project-oriented. So when I go into pitch, I keep that attitude in mind, and things still shift in my head. Now, on a mechanical level, there are two things. One deals with the elevator pitch, which everybody hears about. And the other one deals with actually being in the room and the most difficult thing about being in that room. Elevator pitch. This is a bit of homework for everybody. So if you know what an elevator pitch is, the idea concept is you end up in an elevator with an A-lister or somebody who can get your movie made, and you only have until the next floor to pitch it. So boom, you have to pitch it immediately. First thing I want to tell you is never do that. If you're in an elevator with somebody who's an A-lister, don't do it. And I'm serious about that. You think that's your big opportunity. You are so much better off being polite and respectful, because people do remember that. But they definitely remember the a-hole who bothered them in the elevator. Mm-hmm. But the point being is that you have to know how to quickly do this. So if you have an idea, let's say for a series or a movie, get one of your close friends, go to a restaurant, lunch, sit down, tell them I'm going to pitch you something. Don't tell them anything else. I'm going to pitch you something. Sit down there. The waiter comes over and asks for your drink order. Give the drink order. The moment the waiter walks away, start your pitch. Now, you're trying to get through this pitch, but you can see that waiter. So you know you have to get done before those drinks come to the table. So you are watching, you're playing your time, you're going through the pitch. Waiter comes by, you are done with your pitch. Here's the important part. Then turn to your friend and say, now pitch that back to me, because that way you'll hear what they heard. Not what you were pitching, but what they heard. You got to put yourself in the other person's place, and you have to be able to understand that what you are saying, the passion you have, fills in blanks that they're not aware of. But you want to see if they got it. And do this a few times, and you'll start to hone that quick pitch. The next thing deals with in the pitch. When you are invited to go into a pitch, into an office, again, it kind of works with the Zoom, but the office is always better. If you do go into an office, the first thing that's going to happen, you'll be sitting there waiting to go in. They're going to offer you some water. Accept the water. Don't drink it. Take a sip of it. Last thing you want to do is be in the middle of a pitch session and have that little tingling down in your bladder. Start your pitch. After the little chit-chat, there'll always be chit-chat. Hey, how are you? Oh, da-da-da-da-dee, da-da-da-da-da-da. And eventually somebody will say, so what do you got? Start into your pitch. Now, a lot of people believe the most difficult part of a pitch is coming up with that opening. I don't look at it that way. I think the openings are great. That's performance. And we could go into detail about that, which we don't have time for, whether it's a Genesis opening or it's a realization opening, different things. However, the most difficult thing about your pitch is when to shut up. That's the hardest thing. And the reason for it is because when you're done with your pitch, there's generally silence. And we hate silence. Mm-hmm. So immediately, that little animal inside of us, the little protein, that evolutionary model, it starts saying, oh my God, there's silence. I failed. Fill in the silence. And so you're sitting there saying, and then Timmy walks in and finds the dog in the closet. Silence. Because the dog got home before he got there. And that's why, and so when Timmy he didn't know he was, and you're trying to fill in that silence. Okay, here's the trick. That water that I told you, it's right there on the desk in front of you, or the coffee table. When you finish that final line, and then Timmy opened the closet, and there was the dog, you pick up that water and you start to drink. And you don't stop until they say something. What you've done is you've shifted the oppression of silence onto them. You're occupied. And it makes sense. Wow, you just finished the pitch. I'm going to take a drink. Now they're the ones who feel like they have to speak. And this actually works.
Do you know that is a trained technique and tactic in sales?
I did find that out, yes.
That's a sales technique. You make
also
your pitch.
In psychology.
Also in psychology. You make your statement, and then you shut up, and now the onus is on the other side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you use that water technique, it excuses you completely. Ba-bum, I'm out of this.
Very interesting. I've never heard anybody say to drink the water at that point. I think that's a really fabulous lesson for people to pay attention to, because that tells you it's a good dividing line. It's where you can break.
And it's a very mechanical thing. And sometimes people feel like they have to force themselves to do it. But the truth is, no, just pick up the water and drink. Watch the magic happen. It will happen.
And frequently, you're not going to make that sale.
Right.
But it helps to have them contribute to your story.
Absolutely, because you want to get back into that office in the future.
And that's all it is. All it is you're going in with the hope of getting more pitches.
Oh, yeah. And I will tell you, I'm good at pitching. I don't pat myself on the back too often, but because I love doing it. Now, have I sold every show I pitched? Absolutely not. But I've won almost every pitch I've done.
Well, you've made friends one way or another with every pitch you've given.
Yeah.
And therefore, you'll get that invite back.
Right. I have the open door. And I tell people that sometimes that door will swing open wide and you'll be surprised. Oh, my God, I'm actually now on the inside, which is what happened when I broke in.
Right.
Or that door is open and they say, but you know what? We're going to leave the door open for you because you're an interesting person. We want you back sometime.
And ultimately, it's a numbers game. The more times you get in there, the more likely you have a chance of selling something.
That is true. If you don't get in there, then we know what that chance is.
I want to quickly ask you about collaborators. You have had actual collaborators in your life, and as well, you've been forced through the nature of production to collaborate with lots of other people for one reason or another. Mm-hmm. What, in your opinion, is the secret, the trick, the technique, the way to make collaborations work?
A lot of it is getting over the pride and ego. Everybody brings it. I am project oriented. So when I'm working with other people, if I'm co-writing something with somebody, or if it's in a writer's room, again, first thing I do is I say, okay, I'm not the biggest voice in here. I give absolute respect to the other people who are there. And I give respect to their ideas and their contributions. Quite honestly, I try to learn from everybody I work with. One of the things about my partner, Bert, way back then, I was really good at plot structure. I was really good at these little twists and little quirky personalities. Bert was really good with deep character. Now, remember, I was then known for writing deep characters because I paid attention to what Bert was doing, and he was really good at this. And I learned from him. And I like to think he learned something from me, aside from making little origami birds or something like that. But we learned from each other. And we were also best friends at the time. So that, that helped out. So every time I'm working with somebody, I try not to get all full of Steve. I try to say, hey, I am just as much learning about this as you are. And so there are two revelations with that. One, I realize that this person is going to try to make it better, and my name's going to be on it as well. But secondly, it also means, but I also have value, and that value needs to be respected. So I have worked with difficult people. I have worked with some people where we started out trying to write something together, and it just was not going to work, and we remained friends even though we abandoned the project. I have worked under extremely difficult people, and I've had people say, would you work with them at the end? I go, absolutely, I would, because I understand them, and I understand my own value. So with collaborations, there's a lot of give and take, back and forth, but the way you can kind of encompass a successful collaboration is if you're in a writer's room, and there's something that comes up, and people start getting into a creative argument, and they go back and forth about this. And this creative argument is like, oh, and sometimes it can get a little personal. Sometimes, like, well, you would think that because and then suddenly somebody goes, wait. Oh, cool. It's lunch. You guys want to head out? Where do you want to go? And you just go out and have lunch. Then you come back and you go, okay, where did we leave off? And you realize you're not going to pick up into the argument. You're going to say, okay, so we were trying to solve this. So yeah, and I think everybody who's had a successful writer's room has had that experience. You have to kind of like the people on some level.
At some point, you're going to work with people who are not on your wavelength, or maybe multiple people who aren't on your wavelength. And then the key is whether or not you're capable of figuring out their wavelength and maybe getting on theirs versus trying to force them onto yours.
And part of that goes into trying to put your perspective into their head. Mm-hmm. When I get notes from people, how do I handle input from people? The first thing I do is assume they're right. That's true. If I hear somebody give me a note, whether it's an executive or a fellow creative, fortunately, many of the executives I worked for were incredibly creative. But the first thing I do is I assume they're right. And the reason I do that is because if they're right, they're going to make the project better and save me a lot of work. If they're wrong, I will have at least gone through the process that brought them to that opinion so I can understand it. And then we can find a way to resolve it.
How often do you get notes and the note is clearly not right for the moment that they're talking about, which is going to be a frequent thing that happens, but it actually triggers another thought for you that actually improves things? Does that happen frequently?
Yep. Every time something like that happens, and that is true with me, I embrace even the notes I don't agree with, especially when you're working for a network or you're working for a studio and they say, well, you got to put this in. I am not somebody who believes, okay, I'm going to plop it into the scene. I literally say, if I'm going to do that, what can I take advantage of? Because now there's a ripple effect. Oh my goodness, I have to put this in here, but does that mean that he did this because of this? And if he did that, then that plays, and literally I might even do an entire rewrite of the script to try to accommodate one simple note. Mm-hmm. Another rule we used to have in the writer's room, at least I've had on mine, is that any stupid idea is welcome. Throw it out on the table. Literally, and this happened in Xena quite a bit actually with RJ, we would throw out the most bizarre, stupid ideas on the table, and we would laugh at the person and say, oh my God, that's ridiculous. I can't believe that. And then suddenly somebody would say, but if we did, and then we're off to the races again.
I love the creative process. That just sort of just jimmies every lock on the door, and you try and figure out something from what came up. I have been having one of the most wonderful, fun conversations I've had in a long time with Steve Sears, and we're going to wind the show down a little bit right now. And clearly you have worked with lots of different characters, not only on screen, but in real life. And I'm wondering if in all of your experiences, you can share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny.
It. I would say, yeah, I've got 40 years of those stories because every day is a quirky, outrageous, bizarre, weird type of thing. And I'm trying to think if I can isolate. I mean, there are little quirky things that have happened. I remember going down to the A-Team set one time, and Mr. T was standing outside of his trailer, and he was wearing like this bright colored robe, and he had like his little coffee and his bling, and he had like a goofy hat with the ears on it. And this was back before all of our phones had cameras, and I was like, God, I wish I had that photo. That would be so awesome. But there's just, I try to single out one particular thing, but let me tell you this, because this will explain a lot about me as well. Now, when I was a kid and I loved television, there were a few characters that I played. Every time I'd go out in the yard and play these characters. One of them, of course, was Captain Kirk. I had to go out there with Captain Kirk. The other one was from a series called The Time Tunnel.
I remember The Time Tunnel.
The Time Tunnel was about, it was a time tunnel that these two scientists go into, and every episode they were in a different part of time, while the crew back here was trying to bring them back into the contemporary time. And Jimmy Darren played the role of the somewhat rash young scientist named Tony. So whenever we played Time Tunnel, I was always Tony. Because I was like, yeah, I'm like that, young, brash, and, I'm like 10 years old, 12 years old, whatever. So, but I was always Tony. All right, so Paige is off the calendar, and we're doing this episode of A-Team. And Jimmy has become a director. In fact, this is, I think, one of the first things he ever directed was this episode. And so at that time, I was engaged to my first wife, and I was at her place, and it was a Sunday before we started shooting. And I'm on the phone with Jimmy talking about some details, changes in the script and stuff like that. And so we're chatting. And then I say, okay, well, I'll get those pages out and I'll see you tomorrow. And he goes, okay. And I hang up. And my then fiance, she says to me, who is that? And I said, oh my God, that was Tony. Holy crap. That was where that little kid had been pounding at the back of my head saying, do you realize what you're doing? Do you realize where you are? And I've gone through that a couple of times where I'm like talking to somebody on a business level, and I realize you were like, when I was growing up, you were I'm reluctant to say my hero, because my heroes really were my parents, but you had such an influence on me. And you remember I've told you the story about Richard Dreyfuss, about when I broke in.
Mm-hmm.
Richard Dreyfuss was the one that he won that Academy Award for playing me. I finally had a chance to meet him at a Comic-Con. And I told my friend, I said, let's walk by where he's signing. If he's a jerk, I don't want to mess with him. But, and I walked by and he seemed like he was very nice. He was chatting with fans. So I said, all right, I'm going to stand in line and get his autograph. And I had like a copy of The Goodbye Girl. I was going to get him to sign that. So I went up there and got him to sign it. And as we were chatting, I told him, I said, by the way, I actually work in the industry. And I gave him a few of my credits, including Xena. And he was very complimentary about Xena. He just said, that's a great show. It's changed a lot of lives. And I was like, thank you very much. And then I told him that story about how I realized that I had said that only special people win that Academy Award. But if he had ever thought that way, he would have never gotten near it. And he just glanced at me and says, never occurred to me that I couldn't. And I just smiled and I said, that's the point. That's the point. So, when I think about those quirky, weird, strange things, it's those ones that just hit me right in the chest and say, Steve, do you realize the life you have been able to lead?
Oh, I understand that big time. It's like you look back and you go, how did this happen?
Yeah.
But there it is.
Yeah. Go figure. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life.
Well, you and me both. That's why we're sitting here having a chat. So the last question for you today, Steve.
Dun, dun, dun.
You've already given us a huge amount of wonderful advice throughout the whole show, but I'm wondering if you have a single solid piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to those who are just starting out, or maybe they're in a little bit trying to get to that next level.
Absolutely. There's a lot of advice I could give you because as anybody who's been in this industry for a long time, you begin to realize that all the technical aspects are things you can learn in class or you can learn in books. But at the end of the day, the hardest thing is staying in the business. And a lot of that is really your philosophy about it, how you regard the business, how you regard yourself. But I kind of look at it this way, and this is, again, expressing myself. And if you're like listening to the podcast and you've heard me talk before, you've heard me say this because it's very important. And I express it this way. When little children are born, and this has got a bit of spirituality into it, not necessarily that I am agreeing with it, but it has it in there. You could say that the child just came from the universe. And that child knows everything. It just came from the universe. But we don't understand it. It's so knowledgeable and it's blah, 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 blah. We don't understand that. So what we have to do is we have to teach it a language. Now, the moment we start teaching the language, we're actually putting a little bit of a structure around what it can express. We're using words to do that. And then what is the one word that they hear the most often? No. No. Now, it's meant to be protective. No, don't do that. You'll burn yourself. No, don't do that. It's cold outside. But after a while, it becomes, no, don't wear that. It's embarrassing. No, don't say that. You'll make us look bad. No, da, da. And what happens with every no is that a wall gets built around that child. And pretty soon, without realizing it, you're trying to fight the walls that you built yourself. You've got to let that child go. You got to let that child kick down those walls and play again. The whole reason we love doing this is because it's like a child in a big sandbox. We can build anything we want if we allow the child to do it. A child can solve so many problems if they're given the freedom to do it. But what do we do with those walls? So the thing I tell people is never be afraid of that inner child. Never be embarrassed by that inner child. Let that child run free, kick down those walls and have fun. And especially if you're a writer, you put it down on your keyboard, on your screen, on paper. Even if nobody sees it, that little child had one hell of a time exploring those avenues and those possibilities.
I think that is just wonderful, because how many adults have lost their childhood?
Yeah.
The feelings of being a child. And as a writer, as a person in show business, I think it's really important that be found again if it's gone, or maintained if it's still there. And I think that's really fantastic advice.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Steve Sears, this has been an absolutely spectacular, believe it or not, hour and 15 minutes
on
StoryBeat today. And I cannot thank you enough for your time, your energy, and your great wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here. This was a lot of fun. I like this.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.